think that's our cue. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to session W9, Me, Myself, and AI, New Frontiers in the Age of Human AI Operation. My name is Kenneth Armstrong. I'm the Acting Deputy Director for the Division of Systems Analysis in the Office of Nuclear Regulatory Research. First, thank you for choosing to be here with us. I know it's a busy week. There are great sessions happening at the same time. The weather outside is tempting, a little overcast today, but it beats the snow that we had a couple weeks back. So the fact that you're here in this room tells me that you're curious as I am about where human AI teaming is headed. AI is everywhere. It's in the news, it's in our workflows, helping, hopefully not doing my kids' homework for them, maybe even helping to draft a few speeches this week. But while the technology is evolving quickly, what matters most is how we as humans adapt, collaborate, and stay in a loop with these systems as they become more capable. That's the focus of today's session, not science fiction, but practical, operational, human-centered integration of AI in high-reliability environments that we commonly work in. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping notes. Please silence your mobile devices. If you need the Wi-Fi passcode, it's RIC2026. All sessions throughout the week are being video recorded, and we'll be handling all Q's and A's in both person and virtual through our electronic platform. So if you're coming in virtually, you have the little banner there on the right. There you go. If you're here in the room, you've got the QR code there to scan with your phone. I'd like to give a shout out to Dalton Sparks and Taylor Lamb for helping to coordinate today's discussion. There's a significant amount of work that goes into making this week possible, and thanks to our coordinators for helping to set all this up, as well as all of our audio video folks. We're fortunate to have a truly outstanding panel with us, experts who bring perspectives from regulation, research, engineering, and international collaboration. I appreciate having Stephanie Morrow from the NRC, Chris Ritter from INL, Joha Lakna from Westinghouse, and Andreas B. from Halden, and look forward to their presentations. Together, this group gives us a full aperture view spanning human factors, computational science, engineering design, and international research and development. Today, we'll explore questions such as, how do we maintain human authority and situational awareness when AI systems take on larger roles? What skills and tools will our workforce need in an AI-enabled future? And how do we design systems that keep humans empowered, not overshadowed as automation advances? As you listen to each presentation, I encourage you to think not just about what AI can do, but what it means for humans as operators, analysts, regulators, and decision makers. Where are the opportunities? Where are the boundaries? And how do we strike the right balance? I would also like to highlight the NRC's second annual AI Symposium, taking place tomorrow afternoon from 1 o'clock to 5:15 p.m. If you're interested, here's the QR code for registration, right there on the right. U.S. citizens can register for in-person attendance until 5 p.m. today. Otherwise, non-U.S. citizens and anyone registering after 5 can still participate virtually. With that, let's begin our journey into the frontier of human AI operations. Our first speaker is Stephanie Morrow, a human factor psychologist in the Office of Nuclear Regulatory Research at the NRC. Since joining the NRC in 2011, Stephanie has applied human and organizational behavior science to the safe design and operation of nuclear technologies. She manages research to develop human factors licensing guidance for new and advanced reactors and serves as a senior safety culture assessor, leading safety culture evaluations at plants and vendor facilities. Stephanie holds a PhD and master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology from the University of Connecticut. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Morrow.
All right, thanks very much, Ken. So I have to start with just telling you this has been a really interesting panel to prepare for, but what I'm most looking forward to is the discussion today, so hopefully I won't take up too much of your time with this presentation. As Ken mentioned, my background is in human factors and organizational psychology, and for most of my 15 years at the NRC, I've been in the Office of Nuclear Regulatory Research. I'll start there. I often have to look beyond the horizon of the NRC's current licensing and oversight activities and anticipate what new issues we'll have to grapple with in the future. So my remarks today will focus on human factors considerations as we think about the introduction of AI in nuclear power operations. Of course, I must show the obligatory slide that my views are my own and not official views of the NRC, and a note that AI was used to assist with the creation of images in this presentation. So, given the topic, I felt that it was quite appropriate. But let's get started right here. AI is coming. Well, it's already here in many aspects of our lives. It's already here in many aspects of our work. If you went to the AI session yesterday, you will have heard how AI is being incorporated into the NRC's work. And as I thought about how to approach this topic, I really debated whether to approach it as a skeptic or a cheerleader, because I tend to vacillate between both on any day. But I opted for a more pragmatic approach. So I'm starting with AI is coming. And like a high-speed train, whether a skeptic or a cheerleader, we can't ignore it, and it's developing fast. The prospect of AI in operations is a new chapter in nuclear, and we have to take it seriously now so that we're prepared to address it when it inevitably arrives. Of course, even as we contemplate AI, our priority must always be safety and reliability. This is true not just for the NRC, but for the nuclear industry as a whole. Innovation is exciting, but it must be grounded in safety and reliability. Another thing we shouldn't take for granted is that AI is not one monolith. It can be many different things based on very different underlying methods and used in many different ways. Where and how AI is used matters because it has implications for safety significance, error consequence, and level of expected human-AI collaboration. For example, AI could be used for predictive maintenance out in the field, or as an assistant for anomaly detection in the control room, or as decision support for things like risk assessment, reviewing tech specs, or regulatory requirements. Perhaps even fully autonomous control of plant operations. But that doesn't mean the human goes away. Even if AI-enabled autonomous control is achieved, there will still be a human somewhere with authority and responsibility over the AI system. I believe that is a key principle for AI and autonomous systems in nuclear operations. Human operators must retain ultimate authority and responsibility for plant operations. We in human factors refer to this idea that automation simply replaces human action as the substitution myth. In reality, and we've seen this borne out by research and experience, automation doesn't eliminate the human, but instead changes their role and often places new responsibilities on personnel. Operators may go from hands-on control of a system to monitoring and supervising automation. In many cases, the human role may be minimal until something unexpected happens. Then we often expect the human to just jump in and take over. Or we expect the human to detect when automation isn't performing as intended. If these new roles and responsibilities are not addressed adequately in the design, then we make it challenging for personnel to perform their new role. When an incident occurs, we often call it human error, but it may be clumsy automation or poor allocation of functions. What we're trying to avoid is situations like this. So I'll just pause here for a moment. What do you see in this picture? Cognitive overload, stress, anxiety, confusion, uncertainty? I actually think AI did a pretty good rendering of this image. This is poor human-AI integration. We're not eliminating the human, but we also don't want to create this situation. This is not a recipe for good decision-making. To truly consider adoption of AI in the nuclear field or any safety-critical system, we have to consider it as a joint human-AI system. and design the system in such a way that humans can effectively work together with AI to ensure safety and reliability in all conditions. There's well over 40 years of research on human automation interaction and human system integration that we can draw on to apply to human AI interactions. So I'll touch on some of the major human factors considerations with automation. First, situation awareness, which is about understanding an environment and how it will change with respect to time and other factors. Situation awareness can be more difficult when a human's role shifts from active control to monitoring, especially when a human is expected to take back control if the automation fails. This can have significant performance and safety implications, especially in time-critical events. Trust and automation reliability is another consideration. Overtrust can lead to misuse of a system, whereas distrust can lead to workarounds to avoid the system completely. Next, workload. So we tend to see automation introduced as a means of lessening human workload. But when there are conditions outside the capacity of the automation to handle, workload can spike. On the other hand, very low levels of workload can impact vigilance and the ability to detect errors. Teaming can involve human-human, human-system, and system-system interactions to achieve desired outcomes. Effective teaming can improve situation awareness, communication and coordination, and critical decision-making. So, for example, in the current fleet, operators use human performance tools like three-way communication to support teaming and reduce the risk of human error. When we think about human AI teaming, we may need some different strategies. Training is another critical consideration as we shift to increased use of automation. More automation may increase the complexity of the human system interfaces used, requiring not less, but more training on navigating the interface or understanding the underlying capabilities and limitations of an AI system. Skill and knowledge retention is related. Tasks that were once routine may become infrequently performed, and less direct engagement with plant systems can reduce the skill and knowledge retention over time for operators. And finally, with new ways of employing automation in reactor operations, there may be novel error types stemming from either new human system interactions or perhaps AI systems behaving in unexpected ways. I mean, we don't see that, right? So these are challenges with any type of automation, and AI can exacerbate some of these challenges because of its complexity and ability to adapt and change. So think about that, the ability to adapt and change. That's one of the advantages of AI. But when we think about it from the human AI system perspective, that can be a challenge. AI can be a black box. So how do we take a human-centered approach to addressing this challenge? So, first of all, AI is something that many industries are grappling with. Nuclear is not special and unique in this area. But that means we're not alone, and we're not starting from scratch. In 2023, the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society released a policy statement on AI guardrails for human use. It includes a specific set of principles for use of AI in safety-critical applications. And these principles may serve as an important starting place for how we can take a human-centered approach to introducing AI in nuclear systems. So there are 7 guardrails for human interactions with AI, specifically in safety-critical applications. First, AI must be explainable. Users of AI must clearly understand its capabilities and limitations. Transparent. Users should be provided with information on how well AI is working, its current mode and situation assessment, the reliability of the underlying data or sensors that feed the AI, and the AI's level of confidence in any assessments or recommendations it makes. Safety alerts. The AI system must provide salient and timely alerts to users when manual intervention is required. autonomy must be validated. In cases where AI is designed to operate independently, the AI system must go through performance-based validation and testing to demonstrate that it meets or exceeds the performance of experienced human operators in realistic operational conditions. It should be fail-safe. AI systems should be designed to revert to a safe state when the automation fails to perform correctly for any reason. There should be user training. AI developers should provide training to users on the capabilities, limitations, and behavior of the technology. And finally, it should be tested with humans. AI must undergo testing in realistic conditions with representative users. So as a complement to developing specific guidelines and principles like the AI guardrails, a robust human factors engineering program applied early and throughout the design process is critical for successful AI integration. The NRC staff uses New Reg 0711 as guidance for reviewing human factors engineering programs. Revision 3 came out in 2012. So that may not seem like a long time to some of you, but we know that 14 years is a lifetime or multiple lifetimes in terms of the evolution of AI. So we have to ask, is it applicable? Is it relevant? Can it handle the potential of modern applications of AI? And you might be surprised to learn, and I truly believe this, that its high-level structure, the 12 elements you see on the figure in this slide, maps surprisingly well to the challenges of evaluating AI-enabled tools in nuclear operations. This provides a disciplined and safety-oriented framework for ensuring that new technology supports operators rather than undermines them. Now, that being said, of course there are bound to be some gaps, especially when we're talking about the potential of autonomous AI systems. And the NRC's Human Factors Research Program is exploring these issues to provide our licensing reviewers with the guidance and tools they need to evaluate novel human-system interactions. So again, taking that more pragmatic approach to AI and nuclear operations, I leave you with a few concluding thoughts. First, we need to consider AI as a support tool, not a replacement for human judgment. We need to develop specific guidelines for human AI collaboration in nuclear contexts. The AI guardrails provide us with a good starting point. Next, and this is for the developers out there especially, please incorporate human factors evaluation early and often during AI deployment. And as our nuclear technologies, use of automation, and AI continue to evolve, we must emphasize resilience and adaptability in system design. So this isn't new for nuclear, but it is more important than ever. If we're going to see AI in nuclear operations, it should, at a minimum, be used to augment operators rather than replace them, be transparent enough for operators to understand and challenge, and be monitored throughout its life cycle to ensure it performs reliably and safely. I'll end here with contact information for myself and my colleague, Nia Hughes-Green, if you'd like to talk more about our ongoing human factors research. And if you'd like to keep up with our human factors research publications, please consider signing up for our listserv via the NRCgov delivery subscription service using the QR code on this slide. I thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Stephanie. Our next presenter is Chris Ritter, who's currently the Division Director of Scientific Computing and AI and Director of Digital Innovation Center of Excellence at Idaho National Laboratory. Chris leads a team of about 100 experts advancing AI, ML, digital engineering, high-performance computing, and digital thread technologies across the nuclear energy, national security, and other critical applications. He founded INL's nationally recognized digital engineering team, led development of the first nuclear reactor digital twin, and serves as the National Technical Director for AI for the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy. Please join me in welcoming Chris Ritter.
Thank you very much. So we'll talk a little bit about what can we do with AI in the community that we're in and what the opportunities are in that space, and also a little bit about where the human element comes in and how we can actually get to an environment that's actually safer than where we are today. And we'll talk about that in some detail. So the first slide I want to present is the Genesis mission itself. Raise your hand in the audience. I'm curious. How many are actually familiar with what the Genesis mission is? So good. For many of you, this is new. So the Genesis mission is the Department of Energy's very large AI initiative. It actually spans all of government. Department of War, for example, is a partner of Genesis. And Genesis's goal or call to action, right, is to double scientific and engineering productivity. Primarily from an R&D perspective, but also from an energy perspective and a national security perspective. And so if you look at the way Genesis is broken out, there's two pieces. There's the platform, which is infrastructure. Think of high performance computing, cloud, those types of assets. Data, so without data, right, you don't have an AI to train. So where is the data that you're going to use for your AI? AI models that are multi-domain are also part of the platform. So think of like something that can generate a CAD model, something that can run a scientific instrument, things like that. And then on the right, what are the problems that you're going to solve? And there are three boxes. So there's the purple, and blue. And if you look at the energy dominance area, you'll see in very small print, if you're in the room, you may have a hard time reading it, but it says in the third bullet, advanced nuclear, faster, and safer. And that's what we're going to focus this entire presentation on. The red box is also the box that we lead in Office of Energy for the department, and Rian Burhan, who is my federal peer, and I shepherd that for the whole department, so all the energy challenges. Of course, nuclear is near and dear to our heart. We're not allowed to have favorites, but if we did, it would be nuclear. So in the department, we have it broken down into these pieces. So first is design. So what can we do to automate more elements of design and get us out of the paper-driven process that many of us are in today? The second is really what we're kind of updating the language to be build. So think of manufacturing and construction. So what can we do to automate the manufacturing process? Think of automated advanced manufacturing. What can we do to accelerate the licensing process for nuclear? And then autonomous operations, which also includes remote operations. And this is where there's a huge human element and a huge, probably conversation that we're going to have about this. And then the last part is autonomous laboratories. So right now, working at a national lab, our human operators, they like to sleep. They also, are not in the lab 24 hours a day. So what that means, if you're qualifying a new fuel or material, right, it's not always, no one's working 24 hours a day, I hope. It's not always, operating. So what can we do to enable robots and more automation in the experimental process to double the productivity through those laboratories? So that's what we're looking at. We're at the very early stages of that area, but it is something that we're excited about. So the first is this Prometheus challenge. And this is a challenge, this is a goal of where we want to head. So the goal is to drastically accelerate our schedules. So we want to go to 2 to 5x schedule acceleration. We ultimately want to reduce OpEx costs by up to 70% for certain applications. So where would that make sense? Imagine if you have a fleet of microreactors, and today, by regulation, you need to maybe have 16 people or so, right, that are available. You could unlock remote operations, right, managing a fleet. And that's the goal where we want to head. That doesn't mean we were eliminating humans, but it means the humans maybe have a different role. Board certified manufacturing. So today, if you think about the way most reactor components are made, right, we're doing them one-off today, right? As far as I know, no one's printing them off on an assembly line today. So Oak Ridge National Lab has what they call the MDF, or Manufacturing Demonstration Facility, and the MDF is able to do AI in the loop to get the quality assessment of that part as it's made. So rather than doing the paper dedication process, you can have with it a in-the-loop dedication process for what that looks like. The third part is public-private partnerships. So we want to work across the laboratories, AI developers, and industry together. We've announced some of these already today. So for example, we announced a partnership with NVIDIA, Amazon, Microsoft, and a few others, Atomic Canyon being another, and we are working with some companies I can't name because we haven't announced them yet, but we are working with many different people on this. And then the fourth part is aggressive milestones. So assuming it works, you'll get to see a demo video of what some of this early research looks like and how we're progressing on this technology. So here is the demo video, and it's playing, so this is good. So you can see the first prompt, design a containment structure for an experimental microreactor. And for those who have done this before, you can kind of see the prompt plan that came out. So right now it's live making this CAD model for you. That's real. It's an agent called Alchemy that does that. The second agent is going off and building a Moose input deck. Some of the meshing part of it wasn't automated in this demo, but we're working on automating that now. And then it's running that simulation for you. So it's kicking off a job onto an HPC asset, running it, and then producing this nice visualization for you all automatically. So it makes the geometry, it goes through and builds a plan, and then it builds this result. And then you here in a second, you're going to see our partnership with NVIDIA. They've built this full 3D visualization. So this is the dome, right? And this shows if you had a microreactor, what would that heat circulation look like over time? A real problem that we're actually looking at. And this simulation, to be transparent, is not agentically created yet. We're working on that with NVIDIA, but it is a real result of that simulation. So early stage tech, there's still a lot of work to do on GPU acceleration. There's still a lot of work to do to verify those agents. We have not yet done testing of like where humans fit in this loop and how does this actually enable. So there's a lot of work to do, but you can see an example and just, this was done in like 4 weeks of how much progress is being made. And there is a new demo video that I didn't clear it in time that is also available showing even more of these agents working together. So we're making a lot of rapid progress as part of the Genesis mission. And so another aspect of this that we have been working at on a long time in the National Lab System is autonomous operations and maintenance. So on the left, we did a digital twin of what's called Magnet. So Magnet is a non-nuclear facility. And I still remember back in 2020 when we started that project, they were like, well, there's no way you could do autonomous control of a lab facility. And then we asked the question, well, why not? And so it's always important to ask questions, right? And then work through that research process. And the reason was, well, we can't verify that everything that comes from that AI agent is actually, this is before agents, but that comes from that AI is actually going to be within this range. And we said, well, why don't we build a second tool that checks that range before it sends the command? Oh yeah, okay, that would work. So it's important to ask questions of why can't you do something, right? And so for an hour and a half, that facility streamed data in real time locally, and then an AI model ran on it, predicted its state 10 minutes into the future, and then sent AI commands directly to the asset without any human intervention at all. Now, there was a human watching it at all times, and that's important to mention. But there wasn't a human clicking the buttons. So that we did back a few years ago. Our Marvel microreactor, so you can see the MAX system, which is the control system, right? The early phases of that we're working on. We've also made a lot of progress, not on building an autonomous Marvel yet, but looking at more opportunities for digital control and more opportunities for, how could we eventually get to an autonomous control of Marvel? And that's something that, we're not ready to announce anything yet specifically today, but something that we're interested in the future and using our national lab assets. And then on the right is the first edition of a nuclear reactor. So the AGN-201, who's familiar with AGN-201s? Raise your hand. So I would do a quiz, but no one has mics, but 5 watts of power, right? So very low power. I didn't say 5 kilowatts, 5 watts. But it's a great example. These university reactors provide a great opportunity to do this early stage testing. So Chad Pope, he's the department chair at Idaho State, and he was like, hey, we have this reactor. It was all analog, and a team across the laboratories and the universities digitized the data stream through the DAC system, and then used that data stream to predict in real time how it was operating. We are also working on remote operations of that same reactor and at Pure One, which is Purdue's, it's a higher level than 5 watts, but at Pure One's reactor as well. So what we learned from that experiment was something really important, which is having multiple models is really important. So a digital twin, right, just like streaming data to the cloud and running AI on it is interesting in its own right, but it's not interesting if you don't verify it and validate it. Stephanie mentioned that in her talk. And so we did a red-blue team test. How much better or how much worse is this than prior models? And what we found was AI models, there's a classic example, you can change a pixel, and you can take a picture of a cat and have it think it's a gun. And that's because neural networks are fallible, right? And even though as a human, you might look at that picture and go, that's definitely a cat. Just the way that model learned, right, it actually thinks that particular pixel is really important to thinking that this is not a cat. So we found that is still true for nuclear. And when we had a single model, it could be tricked. But when we had multiple models, it was too hard to trick it anymore. So the red team, which by the way consisted of some SROs, were really clever, but never clever enough to trick both models at the same time. So that was the important lesson that we learned from that experiment. So we ran the experiment a few different times. And the other thing we learned too is the red team, the nefarious team, the more they learned about how the model worked, the more they were able to trick one of the particular models. Each time we presented the results back, right, they learned. But all those experiments occurred within a 30-minute period. So the AI would run, the SRO would do the operations, and then they presented back all of the results within that 30-minute phase. So there's no human in the loop with how those results were presented. It's all AI. So, so the next thing that we're working on is at NRAD. So NRAD is a smaller TRIGA reactor at the Idaho National Lab. And this is the reactor that, right now, here's our Beholder digital twin that's doing anomaly production. So what's important to realize about this is not real-time streaming like the last example, but we're headed in that direction. So, so this is a demo that we just gave back in December. And in June, we're planning on doing real-time streaming of that reactor, similar to what we did with the AGN-201 at a higher power level, and then next year doing autonomous control under DOE authorization. So again, there will be a human watching, but the idea is to do these early experiments to learn, what is the regulatory profile for this? What does that look like? And an important example, and I pulled the latest statistics on this. So I took a Waymo. I was in Arizona earlier this week, as some of you know, and I was surprised, honestly, how safe I felt. In an autonomous vehicle, they progressed, right? I've been in, I won't name other vehicles, but I've been in other vehicles that I didn't necessarily feel as safe. And I'll explain why I felt safer in the Waymo, right? It followed the speed limit at all times. Does your Uber driver always follow the speed limit? It followed every stop sign, every stoplight, right? It was very cautious. It actually took me 5 minutes longer to get to my destination than the human driver did earlier that day. But in that 5 minutes of extra time, I actually felt like, okay, this is a future I can buy into. And so I pulled accident data that's live. So this is coming from a report that's very recent. So Waymo has actually identified an 85% reduction in injury crashes, and their crash rate is 6.8 times less than a human crash rate. So they are seeing a already quantifiable benefit of AI in the loop. And remember, there are still remote human operators, if you will, that are still able to engage a Waymo if it receives a situation it can't handle. But that's an example of how to do it right. When we talk about AI, we don't want to end up with something that's just faster. It also has to be safer. And that's the point I want to make. So the last challenge is Vulkan. So this is our autonomous labs example. And so we are doing a lot of work on data to aggregate for this, and then doing the early phases of robotics. You can see one of our researchers, Cam, doing some early robotic control in our laboratories to try to increase our throughput on our laboratories themselves. And then the last slide, which my NRC colleague in the audience will relate to, is data. And without data, you can't do AI. And so we've made a huge investment at our lab in data. We call it Pantheon, which is our big data program. And it isn't to replace our existing data assets, it's to integrate all of them together so we can centralize the storage and do training on it. And so, anyways, you can see kind of examples of all the different data assets that we are looking at, everything from the advanced test reactor, which probably you're familiar with, to DOME. We're also looking at other national lab data like HIFER at Oak Ridge, and collaborating across our lab peers. So very new project. Probably almost none of you have heard of this, but it just started a couple weeks ago. And we are excited if you're interested in collaborating. If you have data and you're a university, for example, it's an open invitation. We might be willing to fund you in some way to participate. So with that, I will kick it back over.
Thank you, Chris. Our third speaker is Joe Halakna. Joe is the chief engineer for the Vinci microreactor in Westinghouse's Advanced Nuclear Power for Installations program. Joe began his career with Westinghouse working across AP1000 engineering, supporting licensing, design, construction, and startup. Since 2018, he has been central to development of the Vinci microreactor, leading teams in fuel selection, reactor design, materials research, and advanced manufacturing. He served as the lead designer for Project Pele and for multiple advanced reactor initiatives. Joe holds a bachelor's degree from Penn State and both a master's in mechanical engineering and an MBA from the University of Pittsburgh. Please join me in welcoming Joe Halakna.
All right. Thanks to be here. A lot of exciting things going on in Westinghouse. Obviously, I represent our eVinci microreactor project. I joined that, as Kenneth said, back in 2018. And as you look at where we started and just the, how are we envisioning using AI? How would I be standing here today talking about it? Was nowhere in our mindset, right? Now, we have such an opportunity to do more with our engineers, accelerate nuclear. Again, I like the message of faster and safer. all those possibilities, we're now seeing, really come to fruition across multiple projects. Obviously, things like AP1000, how do we build those faster? How do we build those better? But also our newer projects, such as eVinci and our AP300, along with how do we serve the operating fleet today? So run a little bit through, what have we seen? So within what we now refer to as our innovation organization, that's artificial intelligence and innovation, with an emphasis obviously on that AI. We've been able to build now a lot of tools, as Chris pointed out, right? You need the infrastructure, you need the data, you need to build the models. So it's not, I'll say, an easy journey, but we're already seeing significant benefits in terms of how do you actually bring that into a reactor project and, again, go faster and safer in terms of design. So, again, some quick stats here. I'll say, obviously, one of the things that we've been focused on is that, at the AP1000 level, a lot of great initiative, obviously, but, there's major opportunities here for us to de-risk the construction side. Obviously, we had talked about miles and miles of piping and electrical cables and all these things that really take to build a nuclear power plant at that scale, and just the opportunity there for AI to help. If you ever get the chance, we debuted it last year at the World Nuclear Exhibition, but if you ever get a chance to see sort of our AI booth at any of the conference events, they have a great demonstration looking at how do I take a room, a module, an area of a plant, and basically use AI to look at all those different commodities, all those different things to both either combination of, you can look at both time and schedule. You can actually have the opportunity to look at what's, is schedule driving? Are you on critical path? What is actually the cost savings if you construct a different sequence? And what really is the lowest achievable cost that you can obtain in the construction process? The other area that we're starting to really train our models on, obviously, is fuels. We believe, obviously, there's a great opportunity both in being able to make new fuels, but also make them safer, more efficient, and as Chris also mentioned, right, as you look at your facilities, your factories, how do we both build reactors, but also build them with the high quality, but also the safety that's needed. And part of that, I will say too, is using AI in the sense of there are so many different, if you look at advancing or accelerating the fuel development cycle. Typically, historically, right, we always talk about these 10-year long projects to develop a new fuel. And by the time you're halfway through, as a private entity, most of the time you've given up, or a change of administration or whatever has hit a roadblock and it's difficult to overcome. What we've really started to see in fuels is the ability to take tons and tons of material information, material data, testing, such as whether it's coming out of the university reactors or other research reactor programs, being able to then quickly, with AI, narrow down your data set, narrow down your material selection, optimize your chemical composition, and train your models to very quickly, with our engineers, understand what is the fundamental phenomena or failure modes that are going on, and ultimately very quickly also eliminate a lot of testing, right? So we can do a lot of design, what we refer to as design for experiment. So using AI to really also, when I'm gonna do an irradiation test, really be able to narrow down and predict what's gonna happen so that that test program, which is very costly, time consuming, you're gonna get the best results. You're not either doing too much testing, taking too much time, or certainly not to the point where there's a high probability that you're gonna see a failure and then have to do that test over again. So I'm being able to use that to design the experiment in the first place is also really unlocking the speed that we need for advanced fuels in particular. Obviously, the other part is as we look at operations, right? How do we serve a fleet of reactors? So something obviously for our microreactor product that we're very focused on is that, hey, we really want to develop a fleet, and we want to be able to take all that data, centralize it, train models, but really be able to consume all that data and make sure that we're making smart decisions. In this case, in many cases, right, you're using that data. We're not putting AI yet, certainly in charge. in making decisions. We have a very strong, obviously, ethical use of AI, guidance programs, and philosophies in that regard, but we want to empower our engineers. I will say, so predictive monitoring, using, I'll say also less sensors. So what can we do with the instrumentation we have? As I mentioned, designed for experiment, as you look at where am I putting sensors, how do I optimize that? The more instruments, control, all that drives control logic, ultimately that drives complexity, cost, and so forth for, especially for our first of kind reactor design. So improving that reliability, obviously for our utility customers, the more uptime they have, the more successful they are, and obviously the more successful that the nuclear industry will be. So I started to mention this, ethical use of AI. Again, something that transparency of how we use it, very much today, we still have human in the loop. We are anticipating, obviously, a future, and I think some of the sessions here this week and certainly at the symposium tomorrow will be talking about topics related to how to use this. We are not yet, for whether it's our microreactor or AP1000 or any of these other projects, to that point of autonomous operation. We really want to empower, though, whether it's the operator, the engineers, to be able to take that data and be able to assimilate it, understand it, and improve basically their decision-making capability. So some of the other areas that we've been looking at for how do I actually take the infrastructure, the data, and actually create a customer solution and serve the industry. So some of the areas that, as we look at our customer solutions, talked about fuel load patterns, how do I improve the operation of the existing power plants, safety and security certainly as well, potential safety hazards. The other thing that we spend a lot of time on, again, for our microreactor projects in particular, is modeling and simulation, right? The more end-to-end analysis, one of the biggest advantages we have nowadays is instead of, at least when I was designing AP1000 15 plus years ago, we had all these handoffs between all these engineers, right? They all were using different codes, different software, different models. Next guy rebuilt his own model, that vaguely used the same drawing reference, being able to essentially now consolidate that to one engineer doing basically all the way analyses from fuel all the way out through multiple integrated systems analysis. For eVinci, that's a little bit easier because there's a lot less systems, obviously much smaller megawatt output. But even for AP1000 and our AP300, we're able to do a lot more integrated system analysis, and again, ideally seamlessly hand off those interface points from one system to the next. The other things that I mentioned, obviously, we talk about predicting equipment failures, schedule maintenance, a lot of obviously interest from the operating plants facilities today as you look at aging, life extensions for plants, a lot of value out of taking all the existing data from all the existing uprates and life extensions that have already been executed, and how can we further amplify and use those tools. I'll mention vibration analysis, something that's historically, I'll say, very difficult to quantify and ends up usually in a lot of different testing scenarios to actually validate. Here now we can really start to go beyond what our normal engineers are capable of predicting and analyzing to actually get something that we can put into the plant much quicker. So I'll mention a few things here. So what we refer to as Hive is that, as sort of Chris said on his slide, sort of the infrastructure, right? So that is all of our high power computing. That's really the backbone. That's the infrastructure that we've built dedicated to training our models. We then have a generative AI tool we call Bertha. Bertha was also named for the first female engineer at Westinghouse. But that is our generative AI tool that we start to implement on programs such as eVinci to actually start to absorb, apply the different knowledge bases. So we'll build these knowledge bases. For example, we have basically an atoms knowledge base that's taken everything out of atoms and consolidated it. One of the interesting attributes you start to see is as we apply different knowledge bases, basically different data sets, right, then AI will give you different answers. So how you apply that data, Sometimes we'll do that simply as a sensitivity analysis to see what are the different results. And a lot of our AI tools won't even give you that same result, even with the same data set, time and again. So start to try and understand how do you both use that tool, but also keep the human in the loop. All right, so I'll focus a bit on eVinci microreactor. So the one thing that really, some of the use cases, and at Westinghouse we've developed within our innovation team, I'll say 93 different use cases so far that we're actively using. Obviously, eVinci is one of those and one of the larger ones that we have. Because of all the testing that we've been able to do on eVinci, it was one of our first use cases for developing a digital twin and really being able to start to apply these test cases. You can probably understand that we were a little hesitant over the last couple years to just throw AI at an existing operating nuclear power plant and say, hey, let's demo this tool on the plant, right? For us, eVinci gave us a great sort of test environment, sort of pilot. We were able to pilot a lot of these tools. Obviously, a lot of our testing is also non-nuclear, so we do a lot of thermal tests on our heat pipes and on our design. But it gave us a great opportunity to sort of benchmark and start to apply these tools to real projects and actually gain a lot of lessons learned in that regard. So I'll say, obviously, topic of the RIC is licensing. So to pick on that, one of the key advantages that we've been able to see, right, is as we're developing our design, you sort of end up with two processes, sort of your design team, engineering team doing all these analyses, and then licensing. Obviously, our job historically at Westinghouse is we've been focused on how do you make sure that those teams are working side by side, hand in hand. But now, really, we also have AI to really help generate straight from design documents under those, give those, I'll say, licensing teams, engineers, better tools to more rapidly take all that design information and translate it into a document that then you can prepare for a regulator. Ideally, that's, again, for us, we want to shorten that design cycle, shorten that licensing cycle to bring new reactors to market. I'll end a little bit on focusing on obviously what we have for the eVinci microreactor. Again, this is a little bit different product than AP1000 and AP300. It's a heat pipe reactor. So if you're not familiar with heat pipes, they're basically passive reactor coolant systems. So in this case, for 5 megawatts, we have about 800 heat pipes. Each one of those heat pipes, pretty often, they're in all your phones and laptops. In those cases, they'll be made out of copper and water. Here, we want to pump up the power to get as much efficiency as we can, so we make them out of the working fluid sodium. So it'll basically transfer, it's a two-phase approach, so that sodium will vaporize within a tube, transfer into vapor, transfer actually to our heat exchanger, and then condense back into a liquid and keep self-circulating. So basically, eliminate your reactor coolant pump, eliminate all the active systems of reactor cooling, and replace it with a passive system. And obviously, I'll say one of the key reasons for why 5 megawatt electric or about 15 megawatt thermal, that's about as much as we can put in and still passively decay, reach our decay heat removal requirements. So once you start to get bigger, you start to need a lot more surface area, or if you're going to cool passively, or you're going to need some sort of active system, whether that's water-based or something else to cool the reactor. So the other thing I'll just mention is we use a few different things. So you'll notice, I'll say no control rods. So we have something called a control drum. You'll see this in a lot of the microreactor designs. I know Chris mentioned Marvel and others. So basically it's a rotating mechanism instead of inserting actually into the core. So one side of that drum, that cylinder is basically an absorber. The other side is a reflector. So as that rotates, it changes the reactivity control. And then, so the nice part for us is that it basically gives you a very uniform radial and axial power shape, so eliminates some of the complexities that normally you'd see with control rods. And then we do have rods. They're very basic boron carbide rods, but they are basically the backups. They're not going in and out of the core during normal operation. They would be set at a set point slightly higher than the drums, which would rotate passively first, and then you'd have your shutdown rods. But goal here is for a much longer life cycle. Our market is really focusing on whether it's government, defense, space, Actually spoke last year at the RIC here on our space project. We have a few different applications. This technology really was actually first developed for space. If anybody's familiar with either the CRUSTY or kilopower programs run by NASA and DOE, those were basically small heat pipe reactors at kilowatt scale. And so there's a lot of advantage for them, right? They don't have the chance to inspect those reactors or do maintenance. And so those passive features were very advantageous and a lot of the basis for the eVinci microreactor. So again, here's some of our initial markets that we're looking at with a focus, again, near term on how can we serve our defense, universities, and other sort of advanced either resiliency markets. And I'll end, I think, just with a timeline here. More so for reference, again, really kicked off a lot of our work in 2018 and continued throughout the rest of this year up through 2025 on a large number of our test programs. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Our final presenter is Andreas B., Chief Scientist at the Institute of Energy Technology in Norway and head of the OECD NEA Halden Human Technology Organization Project. With more than 30 years at IFE, Andreas is leading expert in human factors and human reliability analysis. He serves on the board of the International Human Reliability Analysis Society and represents Norway on the OECD NEA Committee on the Safety of Nuclear Installations. His work has long contributed to advanced human technology integration across the global nuclear community. Please join me in welcoming Andreas B.
Thank you. So the topic is AI and operational boundaries, how human-in-the-loop enables faster deployment. That's a statement, and I'll try to find some arguments for it. Outline, look into a little bit where and for what with AI in nuclear, that has been touched upon here. Challenges, some of the dimensions that Stephanie mentioned in the human-AI teaming. Early analysis and faster deployment, is that possible with the humans in the loop there? And what are the questions that really needs to be addressed before and during deployment of AI in nuclear? I'll say a little bit about our lab. We have a simulation lab in Halden, in a Halden project called the HAM Lab, where we are collaborating with the US utilities coming over and helping us. We had 7 crews last year, 30 people coming over to help us in our studies. This has been a simulation lab to look into safety of operations of nuclear power plants, so far without very much AI behind the screens. So the question in the future is how much AI will be used behind the screens here to guide operators or to take over for the operators. AI and operational boundaries. 3 years ago, AI and nuclear, if you mention it in one sentence, you would be declared insane. The answer was no. 2 years ago, I was here at the RIC. It was 2 very interesting sessions. One with some very skeptical human factors people. I think they were mainly talking about LLMs and or large language models and hallucinations. We had a really enthusiastic tech guys, like we have here today as well. It's really interesting to hear, and it's really promising. But now, I think for this session, we really embrace the technology, everybody, and begin to ask the right questions. So AI and autonomous technologies redefine operational boundaries. That was sort of the topic for this session, and I think it's a very good question. What are these boundaries then? Are the same questions and challenges relevant for all of these? And I'll talk a little bit about AI in the loop. People have here also mentioned a lot about AI for design. I'll go a little bit more into the operations boundaries. And then on the control loop, if you just visualize the process or the plant like this, you have the automation or the controller algorithms. The topic 2 years ago, actually, the example, the technology they mentioned was a machine learning algorithm for controlling the level of a tank to replace a PID controller, for example. And that might be already possible if you confine the problem in a good way. It may be possible to use machine learning in the control of things already. In a safety loop, safety control room, is that possible or doable? Most people would say no, but it might be also in the future. The main question I would look into is the control room, the operators, and the human system interface they're using. Will we use AI in this connection? And I heard some examples. For example, EPRI looked into AI machine learning systems to filter alarm lists, for example. That might be something to help the detection sort of process of operators. And the big question also is what other types of AI can or should you use in a control room? And Stephanie mentioned a lot of these things, and I think I'll go a little bit into what are the different dimensions would be possible there. People have discussed autonomous systems, semi-autonomous systems. Can we bypass the whole human part here and make a fully AI-controlled plant? It might be possible if you have a microreactor, for example, on the moon. Let's try that, and you have the less consequences. But that's a bigger question, and I don't really believe we are there for very soon. So this is what we call a control loop. Outside, you have a bigger loop. You might have if you have the internet, you have the cybersecurity things and the security operation centers, for example. There's an arrow there into the control room, but that's a dotted arrow. It's not a direct link, but it might be a weak link, actually. But the security operation centers and cybersecurity, they are using AI all the time to defend against attacks, and probably the attacks are also generated by AI, so it's kind of the AI battle going on there already. But it might actually impact the control loop as well. And also other offline applications. I would say if you look at maintenance systems, for example, we started already 30 years ago looking into condition-based maintenance, what you now call, we called it neurofuzzy systems at the time, which is now called machine learning algorithms used for condition-based maintenance, for instrument calibration, and so on. And the utilities already have that, are utilizing that now. Another kind of still offline thing is operational experience, lessons learned, searching, and getting information out of event reports. That are also, some plants are already doing that, but it's still mainly for offline use, for system engineers, for analysis in an offline setting. However, people are talking about utilizing those kind of, and that's LLMs mainly, while the other here is what's still mainly machine learning algorithms. But there might be a bigger loop here, and the impact between these things, between the control loop itself and also the outer loop. So the questions, these are some of the dimensions that Stephanie mentioned: trust, performance, explainability. Many of these things are both used from within AI, so to say. You hear people talk about trust in AI, and they mean, is it trustworthy? So there are some different angles of this, whether it's used from sort of within the AI and when people collaborate with the AI. So, and as I mentioned now, AI is not really AI. Technologies are different. Large language models are different from machine learning, and there might be hidden links. So we don't know, are we in the loop or are we not in the loop? What about confinement? So these dimensions that we mentioned here, explainability, performance, risk, human oversight, trust versus trustworthiness. Trustworthiness is mainly, maybe, for example, objective hallucination rate of LLMs, for example, or accuracy of machine learning algorithms. While when users are collaborating with AI or other even automation systems, that's a different kind of trust. It might be miscalibrated. You might trust a non-working system, or you may distrust a completely fine system. So, and this was mentioned a little bit before here. So it's not that easy to just look into it. The role of humans in safe operation. We hear these new plants have very big views on are there even humans in there? And we have inherent passive safety systems. There is a higher degree of automation, autonomous. So is there a role for humans at all? And my position is yes, there is. Because in 24/7 safety applications, there will always be a role for humans. But it will change from manual operation to monitoring, and even when you look at offline use of AI, you see people taking you more and more do review. You don't write anymore, right? How long will it take before you lose skills to review? And that's maybe some of the interesting questions. So, reimagining human in a loop. There's many ways to succeed. We have you could have passive monitoring with active AI. You could have active monitoring with passive AI. Active monitoring with active AI, or here where it comes to the link to automation, I feel it's many of the same questions actually. Advanced automation, transparent automations was also mentioned here, and maybe is this finally a possibility now to really make sort of an active collaboration, so that you can actually, instead of have a automation or not automation, you can have an agent that you can actively collaborate with and make this automation human collaboration a good collaboration actually. There will be different requirements, as I mentioned also, in these various operational boundaries, in the control loop, outside the control loop, systems versus safety versus non-safety systems, and also for the operators, it's different types of support. You can have support for detection, for example, and leave all of the thinking to the operator, or you can have a diagnosis support, and then you have a lot of the question that Stephanie also mentioned. Where do you can you say no to a proposal from a system, or and there's a lot of things to look into regarding that. Different technologies, I mentioned that, different requirements. Machine learning, maybe it can be used everywhere if it's well confined. Large language models as well can be used if you have human oversight, for example, to take care of these hallucinations. But human oversight has been mentioned. But what is really human oversight? And is it possible to have human oversight without insight, for example? And how do you maintain insight over time? So it's that's the main message here, is that we need to look into this together. We cannot just take technology, put the humans at the end of the loop and say we have human oversight because somebody is looking at it. So how to succeed? Establish concepts, operations early. Because you cannot challenge safety. I've heard that all through the week here. And I believe that the pure technology-driven approach does not work, because we need to look at the collaboration here from a very early start. And we've been working a lot with IDO National Lab on what we call integrated operations for nuclear. And the point there is to establish, for example, implementing fleet-wide integrated operations. But the point there is to establish the concepts operations at a very early phase, so that you can establish this, think it through, and really do that in parallel with the technology, so that you don't really first develop the technology and then look into what are the issues. What are the different requirements in the control loop, outside the control loop? And this will make it possible to do it right the first time. And of course, if you know all of these phases, then that will really cut the implementation time and design time. So, some conclusions. How human in the loop enables faster deployment. First, I would say AI has great opportunities. Now, we heard from IDO this today, how much they're really going for it. So there are great opportunities. My point is that you cannot really let AI loose on safety systems or in the control loop without real human oversight, also meaning human insight into this. And also the way to then include is to design these good human AI teaming solutions at an early stage and test before implementation. So make the concept operations early, test it in simulated conditions, verify and validate, and everything in parallel with technology development. And in short, this is actually good human factors engineering and risk-informed and performance-based processes. And then I thought about, I've read this before. Maybe it was on the front page of the NRC. So, actually, it was the exact same conclusion as Stephanie had. I think I'm quite impressed with NRC, what they've done in the Part 53, for example. It's forward-looking, and it's looking into the opportunities of this and how to make it work in reality. So I'm optimistic. So this is a picture of the fortress in Halden. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you. Looks like we got about 25 minutes and we got 24 questions. So I've done some consolidation on my end. Sorry if your question doesn't get specifically asked, but I think a lot of the themes are the same. So first one, I'm going to give this one to Stephanie, and then feel free to chime in. As we integrate AI into nuclear operations, how do we prevent automation bias where human operators might over-rely on AI suggestions? And what steps are being taken to ensure that the existing nuclear safety culture is enhanced rather than diluted by these technologies?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think that is one of the biggest concerns, automation bias. When we're talking about introducing AI, even in more innocuous ways as a decision support, because we can have this kind of assumption that AI is all-knowing and it's much smarter than I am, so I should go with that recommendation. And there's even some research, early research on AI systems where when experts are shown a rationale for an explanation, for a decision from AI, that they will accept that and they will rely on the AI beyond their own expertise, and we see degraded performance. So I do think that this is a big concern. How do we handle that? I think there's a lot of lessons that we learn from just automation more generally about, providing that background information. We have to do it in a very careful way about, looking at how that information is provided. And we have to look at things like these guardrails that I presented to make sure that we're implementing it in a responsible way where we have that transparency and the human's still able to make an independent decision. Anyone else? Andreas?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a big question, and it's a little bit to compare with the automation bias. But if you think a little bit differently, it might, if you collaborate with an AI system that hallucinates a lot, you won't trust it, right? So then it might be a discussion partner like a person that you, well, I don't trust you now. Oh, but that was an interesting idea. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say the only thing I was going to add is, I think one of the tools that obviously we rely on today is verification and validation, right? And still having, whether it's that SRO, that supervisor, right, having still that, multiple layers of defense for how the operator is going to actually behave in that control room.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, the next question. With the session's focus on reimagining human in the loop, what are the specific criteria or red lines that could be considered when an action must remain under human control versus when it can be fully delegated to an autonomous AI system in a nuclear environment? Andreas, would you like to start with this one, and then we'll open it up to others?
It's a little bit related to the former question, I guess. Well, it's still a big question, and I don't know. I think human in a loop to look into. So I pointed out a little bit in the presentation there that to include quite early the way to work together, and to do that in a proper sort of iterative way when you're testing this, and also to be maybe a little bit open for new ways of sort of collaboration in when you have humans and AI in the loop. But I don't think you cannot say that for AI it's always working or it's not always working, because that is a little bit how we relate to automation. Maybe if you have human in the loop with AI systems, it could be more of a idea, sort of back and forth type of collaboration. That might be another way of looking at it.
So I think it depends on what the application is and what it goes back to me that we're a national lab, so it goes back to science, right? What if you prove it's safer under that application to have AI and not have a human in the loop? Example that was used was space, right? Maybe that latency, if you're on Mars, a human operator, it might take, I think it's like a 15-minute, it's at least 15 minutes, right, to go back and forth. Maybe that doesn't make sense, right, for that application. So I think it always goes back to testing and validation and then proving where it makes sense. There will be cases, I'm sure, where humans absolutely are the ones who are going to make these decisions. There'll be other cases where it's safer to use AI.
Just one more thing that comes to mind for me is, and it's kind of maybe a juxtaposition to what you were saying, Chris, is when there are time-critical human actions. And if you are going to get into a situation where it's possible that you can't rely on the AI, or you're counting on the human from a defense in depth perspective, if the expectation is, oh, AI stopped working, human operator must come in and understand all of the contextual information and make a quick decision, that is the scariest place to be. And that is, the uncertainty and the panic and the anxiety that we would want to avoid. So those are the areas that I think I'm not going to say it's a red line, but those are the areas that I would be most concerned about and looking into from a verification and validation perspective.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Let's start with Chris on this one. As the industry looks to adopt higher levels of automation to improve efficiency and reduce cost, what do you see as the primary technical or cultural hurdle to full adoption? Furthermore, please highlight any research that is currently underway to validate these autonomous systems.
Yeah, so I think let's talk about the most basic thing, right, which is, this will be fun. So in the room, raise your hand if you have access to a recent generative AI model. So I'll define it as like GPT-5 or higher, or Claude, or Gemini, okay, at work. Like a quarter, a third of the room. So that's like the first step, right? Like in the most basic sense, right? Having access to a current-ish, right, frontier model is what we've learned is like an important aspect of this. Now that said, that frontier model is not going to be controlling a nuclear reactor, but it can help you in your day-to-day work, and that's like, we'll say, the most basic level of AI use. The second kind of layer is like in design and agentic design. We're using AI to help you, and we saw in the licensing document area, one thing we're working on with the partner is doing crosswalk between DOE and NRC license, and using generative AI to do that. In that particular case, there's still a human in the loop. There's still a human that's doing that entire verification, so the risk is low, but the opportunity for productivity gain is high. So that's a good example of, in the design and licensing area, where you could use AI today with, we'll call it, not some small tweaks, some evolutionary changes, not a revolutionary thing, to make progress. On the operations side, right, that is very much where we're still in a research phase. There has not yet, to my knowledge, been, because we haven't built an autonomous reactor system yet, there hasn't been a human factor study, which I think is something that absolutely needs to be done, of what is the right level of human involvement when, and to Stephanie's point, so you're not, and this happens in real time. So let's use the vehicle example again. So, a Waymo, you are never, as a human, allowed, it actually says on the steering wheel, do not touch the steering wheel. But in some cars, including my wife's car, it will just disengage with no warning, no beep, no signal. It's just a little icon just turns off. And you are supposed to engage immediately. And it doesn't give you any context as to why. It's just, you are now in control. So that's an example, in my opinion, of a poorly built human factor system. So I think, now that said, I say it sounds poor, but it would be good to do research to figure out, is that poor, right? And like actually do those studies. But I think in the autonomous vehicle area, right, that's why you see companies like Waymo doing slower rollouts. They are fully autonomous, but they are fully autonomous within a boundary, and they've mapped all of those areas, right? And those cars are also very expensive, by the way. I don't think the number's public, but they have the right sensing and stuff right in place, and they're bringing the cost down over time. So they're kind of starting with a really high suite of sensors, a lot of remote humans watching the vehicles, right, and over time, right, reducing the cost of those sensors, right? The LiDAR sensors used to be very expensive, like $100,000, and I think nowadays for a few $1,000s, you too can have a LiDAR sensor. Anyways, the point being that's an area where there needs to be a lot of testing that is done. Autonomous laboratories are similar to autonomous reactors, where I imagine for the first phase, there will be a lot of humans in that loop that are watching all of the robots. I talk about 24/7 robots, right, in those factories, right? At that point, maybe you have a human watching a fleet of them, but you need to do the testing and verification, right, to be able to prove that's possible. So I think it all goes back to science, right? Like, go through and test it, verify it, and actually show that it works, which involves human factor studies.
Just a quick remark on the example you mentioned there with the car. That's actually an example where you have humans as backup for automation or for AI, and that's a bad solution. You need to find something better earlier.
Great, thank you. The next one, this has to do with scalability. So let's start with Joe on this one. So how do human factors considerations discussed today differ when applying AI to large-scale existing LWRs versus deployment of microreactors like eVinci that may require even higher levels of automation operation in remote areas?
Yeah, it's a good question. In terms of, and I'll say the microreactor market, how we envision, I'll say operations, and much more of very quickly, ideally getting to a fleet approach. It's certainly different, obviously, than the big, large LWRs. What we see, though, is ideally we get to our nth of a kind model, obviously, very quickly. And with that, again, being able to take all that data, all of that learning, whether it's in the factory, the construction site, startup and commissioning phases, being able to leverage all of that data and ultimately lead us so that we actually move down that cost curve, right? We reach that nth of a kind cost targets that we'd all like to see nuclear reach as quickly as possible. And so with the eVinci microreactor in particular, it'll only take us ideally, around a year to actually fabricate a reactor. One of the things that is very different from that model, obviously, is I'll say the fuel fabrication, reactor fabrication really drives critical path of a project. Unlike the large LWRs where construction, all the seismic, the geology, all of those aspects where you've got a 4-year construction project before you even get to commissioning, drive a lot of that. So certainly we see AI as helping us reach that scale in achieving the nth of a kind in the microreactor. I think for both scenarios, it's a great tool, will help us scale no matter what, but how we apply it is different for each of those products.
Thank you. Okay, the next question has to do with workforce transition and training. As AI potentially shifts the role of nuclear professional from direct operator to human AI collaborator, what specific new training program should the next generation of nuclear engineers and operators focus on to be successful in this new frontier? So I don't know if it's Stephanie or Joe, or if anyone else would like to chime in.
Yeah, so I can start. This is something we spend a lot of time on. So before, as Chris, you asked, who has access to these? To even get, at least at Westinghouse, right, to get access, you have to actually go through an AI training program to understand what are the things, what are your, we want to make sure you are trained to use said tool in a responsible and ethical means as it applies to, obviously, engineering work in particular, but obviously that extends to operations. I will say one question at every, I'll say, town hall or department meeting for the last year or so is AI going to replace my job, and a lot of these things. And I'll say what we've seen really is much more of this really gives people the ability to do much more, be way more productive, answer questions way faster, ultimately get that response that they're looking for whatever project they're working on in engineering space and move a lot faster. I mentioned some of the examples, whether it's testing related, troubleshooting, all these areas of right now that are, we require a lot of engineers. I won't say gives them superpowers, but really makes their ability to solve problems much faster. And for us, obviously, that translates to cost savings for the customer, cost savings to develop new reactor projects, licensing, any of these areas. So it's certainly, I'll say, on the mind of engineers of, how can I train, how am I still going to learn, especially when we talk about new grads and those just entering the workforce who are very new. They still need to be working with mentors and other engineers, but this gives them another opportunity to learn, and also, we don't want to just put them again in a remote room and say, hey, this is your computer mentor. But it does also give them a lot of capability to do a lot more and be a lot more productive. So that's the, I'll say, impact we've seen on the workforce, which for us, obviously, I think in general for the nuclear industry right now, right, there's obviously huge growth, and we're expecting huge growth. And, I also don't think that's been represented yet in, let's say, undergraduate programs, college programs, obviously tons of work at the national labs, ready to enter the nuclear workforce. So I think there's a statistic out there, you could probably look it up. It's like something like by 2030, about half of the nuclear workforce today, again, a lot of the operating plants, is going to essentially retire. And so how do we look at that development? How can we take a lot of engineers, that are doing great work today, maybe other industries, but also very quickly transition them to the nuclear industry?
I think that was a great answer. I think the only thing I would add is one thing where we've seen very useful is what we call AI jams. So we get a bunch of AI experts together with a bunch of not AI experts, and for a few hours we work side by side. So they come with a real problem that they are working on, and then they get live, we'll call it, I wouldn't call it training, I don't know. They get live help with their job in flight with a cutting edge frontier model. And so in addition to, of course we have policies, in addition to training on what an LLM is, we've also found those are useful things. And that's gotten a lot of buy-in from a lot of our supporting organizations, like the Human Resources Department is a very big user of generative AI at INL, which you wouldn't naturally think. But it's because of the jams that have really gotten them inspired.
I think some of the fundamentals are still going to be important when it comes to training, under the underlying physics of the plant operation. But it's the same as our transition from analog to digital controls, that we're going to have to see more on the interface management side to be able to find the information that you need. So that's part of the, that shift from controlling to monitoring and supervising, and really understanding the capabilities and limitations of your AI system, so that you can start to see if it's drifting out of expected ranges.
Yeah, I really agree with you, Stephanie, there, because if you look at the use of AI in operations, for example, in the control room, as you say, that strikes me as a little bit similar to what you call automation transparency. We had a way to look at it as it will see into automation or see through, so that there's no way you can see into how AI works maybe, but you should see through it and look and understand what the functionality is. And if you look at then as AI as a colleague or a partner to discuss with, then you need to understand the basics of the plant as much or even more than now. So I feel that that's totally agree with you that the fundamentals is even more important, and how to maintain that. Yeah.
Great. Okay, just in a sense of time, just one or two more. So Andreas, this is back to you. Can you expand upon the process for quantifying hallucination rates for AI models during validation and testing? And what frequency of hallucinations would be considered acceptable for safety-related applications?
Okay, thank you so much. It's quite interesting. I heard the first success rates. I talked about LLMs. Oh, it's hallucinating. Oh, it's not hallucinating 94% of the time. And I was thinking, is it 10 to minus 6 and 94%? What's that? So, well, in a safety related, and I think you have to go into the PRA and look into the consequences and do the whole risk to be able to use LLMs but that, as Chris said, it's based on what part of the thing are you using it in design or in operations. You have to do an overall evaluation of the whole setting in the end. PRA.
I agree. It was a tough question, but I agree with Andreas's answer. And I think that's exactly right. It's about testing. It's about PRA, and it goes back to where it's being used. I made a point, which I think is relevant, when I said that we're not using an LLM to control that reactor rate we're trying to look at for 2027. That's not to say that that could never happen, but with today's technology, I don't see it. There's too many hallucinations for that use case. However, I think we had multiple examples of licensing documentation generation, right? So there are uses for different applications where that makes sense.
Great, okay. Here's the last one. All right, I guess we'll start with Stephanie and then open it up. And this has to do with many of the guardrails that are still being developed. So is there concern that guardrails could be a source of workload and uncertainty instead of safeguards? Are there design guidelines out there for developing effective and workload-neutral AI safeguards?
I think that's a true statement, that trying to implement the guardrails, like the AI guardrails, they're going to create more workload. It would be much easier to just implement AI without guardrails. But from a safety perspective, if we're talking about AI being introduced into safety-related systems, then it's our fundamental idea of defense in depth, that we have to have it be transparent, we have to have it be explainable. And I think one of the fundamentals there is the guardrail related to fail-safe. So if uncertain, then put it in a safe state. So that should be the fallback, no matter what.
Okay, great. I think we're approaching time. So I just want to thank again to our presenters, Stephanie, Chris, Joe, and Andres, for their clear and thoughtful contributions today. Your insights highlighted the importance of strong human oversight, well-defined roles, and disciplined integration as AI capabilities continue to advance. As I mentioned earlier, we've got the AI Symposium tomorrow. We're looking forward to seeing as many of you there as possible. There's the QR code if you'd like to scan that. Again, you've got till 5 p.m. today. I think they register for any NRC folks that want to join in attendance. There's a virtual option as well. This concludes our session. Thanks again to all of our speakers today. I appreciate it.